Hey everybody, Ryan here at eTrailer. Today on our 2014 Ford E-Series van, we're going to be showing you how to install the Redarc Tow Pro Liberty brake controller. And we're going to be installing this in conjunction with the Redarc adapter plug, as well as the etrailer.com universal brake controller install kit. But before we get to that, why don't we check this out and make sure that this is going to be a good brake controller for your situation. When it comes to these E-Series vans, really popular in the service industry. You know, a lot of people use these as work vans, and that, you know, entails usually pulling some trailers around, right? You got other equipment, or you know, running from job site to job site, hauling stuff around. And so, you know, when you're pulling that trailer, a lot of them are going to be big enough to have brakes on it, and when they have brakes, you're going to need a way to apply them and help bring you to a safe stop. And I feel like, especially with these vans, I mean, the factory brakes aren't, you know, this ain't a hot rod. The brakes aren't that great anyway, and then usually you're overloaded and it's super heavy, and they can just use some help. And so I feel like it's pretty important to use a brake controller, especially when you're towing. And that's where the Redarc is going to come into play. The way this is going to work is whenever you're hooked up to your trailer and you apply the brakes in here, it's going to apply the brakes on the trailer. And what really separates this one from a lot of the others, I'm sure a lot of people have seen a brake controller before, right? Kind of that big box that's mounted on the dash. This one, the main body of it is hidden underneath the dash, out of the way, and all your controls and everything are just done by this button here. It's pretty cool. It looks really factory and clean. On something like this, is it a huge deal? Probably not, but I do know how things are, you know, how things go. You have this big thing down here, and you got your invoices around, and, you know, stuff piled up all over the place. It's just one more thing that's in your way. And so it does make sense here. I think it's a good fit for our van. And with these, this is a proportional type brake controller as well. So what that means is it's going to give us a smooth braking experience. So the harder you hit the brake in here, the trailer's going to match it. So for example, let's say if you're just kind of cruising, hit a stop sign or something, you got your foot halfway on the brake, trailer brakes are going to do the same thing. But on the other hand, let's say maybe you're going down the highway and some road work or something, you got to come to a pretty quick stop, and you really got to stand on that brake pedal. The trailer brakes are going to do the same thing. So you're going to be stopping as a whole unit, I guess you could say, and you know, it's just going to make it more predictable and provide you with a more pleasant braking experience. You're not going to feel that trailer wanting to drag you back or you know, kind of push you around. So anything that can give you a little bit more confidence, to me, is a no-brainer. This brake controller is good. Going to work with those trailers that have 1 to 2 axles. It's probably about perfect for this vehicle. I don't really foresee too many of these pulling a triple axle trailer around. But it is you're going to be able to adjust the braking force. So you have 0 to 10, and you can kind of adjust this, you know, depending on your needs. So let's say if you have a smaller trailer with nothing on it, don't need a lot of force, right? You probably get away with like a 1 or a 2. But then let's say if you go to job site or whatever and you load it up and it's super heavy, you know, you can crank it up to 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever. 5 being in the middle, so, you know, it might be a good starting point to kind of roll with. But you know, you do have some adjustability there, which is nice. And you also have a manual override, so when you push this button down, it's going to apply just the trailer brakes, and that is good in the event of a sway. So let's say if the trailer starts to kind of get away from you a little bit, you can push that down. It's going to hit the brakes and kind of straighten everything back out. Something that I do think is pretty cool, these have the park brake assist feature. So say if you're at a stoplight and, you know, you're sitting there at a red light, a bunch of traffic and stuff, after a little while, the trailer brakes will release. It don't really take a ton of effort to hold something stationary. Your van can do that without the help of the trailer brakes. And so by doing that, it's going to help save the life of your trailer brakes as well. You're not going to be using them when it's unnecessary. So definitely something good to see, and you know, if it can save you a couple bucks in the long run, definitely ain't gonna hurt anything. Other than that though, at the end of the day, it's a pretty good fit actually. I thought, you know, I really wasn't sure what to think putting a Redarc in a vehicle like this, but after seeing it and seeing how it operates and everything, it makes sense. I think it's a pretty good choice. As far as getting this installed goes, not gonna lie, it's a little bit of work. You know, it's just having to wire everything up and route everything, and it's not really complicated, just time consuming. So be prepared to spend a little bit of time to get this done. But if you'd like to see how that's done, feel free to follow along. We'll go ahead and show you how to do it, how to get everything hooked up together now. To begin our installation, we're going to be here at the back of our van. First thing we need to do is mount up our 7-way connector, which is this here. And with this, I just used a no-drill short bracket to clamp it around our hitch, then connected the included bracket and 7-way connector plug here to it. And once you got that screwed down, we can get the wires hooked up that come off the back of it. So here's where the wires come off the back of it are. One of them is going to be a 4-way flat type connector, and that's going to plug into your existing 4-way flat wiring, so that'll just plug right into each other. And then you're going to have a black wire, a blue wire, and a yellow wire. Yellow wire we're not going to be using, that's for our reverse light circuit. So I just tape that up just in case we ever do want to use it, but I'm not going to worry about that one. The blue wire is going to be our electric brake output. Black wire is going to be our 12-volt auxiliary power. And so I took our duplex wiring here, the big roll of wire that we get, strip back the insulation on each end, and use butt connectors to pair the two wires together. And that leaves a white wire coming out of our 7-way connector. That's going to be a ground wire. And with that one, I simply just use the provided self-tapping screw to run that up into the frame rail to provide us with the necessary ground there. So once all that's done, you know, obviously you can come back, tape everything up, kind of secure it and whatnot. But once that's done, you can take your duplex wiring and start to run this towards the front of our vehicle. So I went ahead, got our wiring ran up towards the front of our van, and I just ran it along our frame rail here, doing your best to avoid any hotter moving parts. And you can just secure it along the way using some of these zip ties. So essentially just a straight shot, more or less all the way up to the front. You can see kind of where it comes out there. And it goes just on top of that heat shield, obviously away from it, but above it. It comes out here, then goes up into the engine compartment. And the way I got it up there, I dropped a piece of tubing down from the top, or you can use like a coat hanger or something along them lines. Tape your wire to it, go back up top and pull it up into position. So now in the engine compartment, our wire comes right up, and then I have it separated. So obviously cut back that gray sheathing and you got a white and a black wire. White wire runs over towards the driver's side. We'll get to that in a moment, but for now the black wire, that's going to get ran to a breaker, which I have mounted up right here. And you'll have a 20 amp breaker, which is this one, and then a 40 amp breaker, which is this one. The wire that's coming up from the bottom of our vehicle, that's going to go to the 40 amp breaker, the silver post. So you'll crimp on a small ring terminal over the silver post, tighten it down with a 10 millimeter. The 40 amp breaker's gold post, you're just gonna take maybe 8 inches of that wire, crimp on a small ring terminal, a large ring terminal on the other end, tighten it down on the breaker, and then this eventually is going to get hooked up to a power supply right here, but I want to get everything else hooked up first. As far as the 20 amp breaker goes, the gold terminal, you're going to do the same thing as a 40 amp, small piece, large ring terminal, small ring terminal. This will go to power as well. Then the wire coming off of the 20 amp breaker, coming off of the silver post, that's going to need to get routed inside of our van along with that white wire. So let's go ahead and take a look at how we did that now. So here's our wires running into the firewall inside of our van. If you move the coolant reservoir out of the way, there's just a few bolts holding it in. Pop them out, thing slides right on out of the way. You can drill a hole into the firewall, which obviously pay attention to where you're drilling. You don't want to drill through the back side of it and drill into your computer or harness or something like that. So pay attention what you're doing. And then I used a rubber grommet to pop in there to keep the wires from rubbing up on bare metal. And once I had that complete, I was able to take our wires and simply fish them inside of the van. So inside of the vehicle now, underneath the dash, this is where our wiring comes through. And this is going to get routed essentially to the center console and up. There's a small compartment that's going to be right above your radio. And so if you just kind of feed the wires along here and up towards the top of the dash, we can show you the little compartment you can pull out to reach down in there and get your wires. So this is the compartment I was talking about, and with this it just essentially pops out. Sometimes you can take a flathead or a butter knife or trim panel tool, pop behind there, release those clips. This will pop out, and then you're going to have this clip, which is, or I'm sorry, this connector plug, which is our plug for our brake controller, which we will be using that in a moment. But here's our two wires. So like I said, I was able to reach down in here and grab them, pull them up. And these are going to get connected to your brake controller plug, which at this point, you know, with the exception of hooking up our power wires, at this point, this is where, you know, the install more or less stops for the universal brake controller install kit. But with that said, obviously you're not going to get to this point and then not finish hooking up your brake controller, right? So from here, this is going to be very similar regardless on what type of brake controller you plan on using. But what you're going to do is take your brake controller adapter plug. So they actually make them specific for our vehicle here, and with this particular one, it just plugs in to that. And the reason we still had to do our ETBC7, our kit there, was because from the factory, this is only providing us with a ground and a brake light, stoplight switch, brake signal, more or less. We didn't have power, or brake controller output. That's why we had to run all these wires. Sometimes you can use, find at least power, which would be this black wire here, but you can look in the fuse block. You might have to pop a fuse in. Sometimes it's not slotted. To be able to do that, and then if you're still going to be running one wire anyway, you might as well just do them both, because there's really no difference in labor. So with that said, since obviously these aren't getting plugged into our other end there, I have the end there, our blue wire and our black wire from this end hooked up to our brake controller install kit wire. So black goes to black for 12-volt power, and blue goes to white for electric brake output. The other wires coming off, the red and the white one, can utilize the factory plug there, plug that in. White will be your ground, red will be the brake signal. So with that all done now, what we can do is find a spot and start to set up our brake controller. So what we did was mount up our brake controller box. It's a little tricky to see, but it's this red piece around here, and there's a big bracket. This is under the dash, by the way, that the panel literally just pops out. You pop this off. But the way this works is I went around this bracket and around this big wire loom and zip tied it up, and it is not going anywhere. That thing is solid. So that leaves you with this phone. It's kind of like a phone, old phone cable, old phone cord. One end of it plugs into, you know, the side of your brake controller, and then this end is going to plug into the switch or the knob that we got to mount up. So I feel like the knob, a good place to mount that is somewhere in this area. I'll figure that out and we'll kind of go from there. So here's where I mounted up our button. I think it turned out really well. Behind here there's actually quite a bit of space, especially with that lower panel down still. You just use the plastic trim ring as a guide, more or less. You drill out a larger hole, drill out a smaller hole, put the trim ring on, tighten this down, and then just pop your button on there. And you know, obviously you want to line the button up accordingly, so that way, you know, in the middle is in the middle halfway through. So I've done that, but now that everything's hooked up, we'll go underneath the hood, connect our power wires, and then we can calibrate and check everything. Under the hood, went ahead and got these wires hooked on up, and I just use this power supply stud here, remove the nut with a 10mm, put these on over it, and tighten it back down. So I went ahead, hooked up to a test box, and that's just simulating a trailer. You can always just hook up to your trailer as well, but we'll see if this is working. So right now it's flashing, which means it needs calibrated. Not really a big deal. You just drive around and apply the brakes as you normally would. I believe with these you don't even have to have the trailer hooked up either. Just drive around like normal. Once it turns solid, you know it's calibrated, but for now we can still test it, at least make sure it's working. So what I'll do is apply the brake pedal, and we can look at our test box and make sure that power is being sent back. So whenever I'm pushing our brake pedal down, we can see that we do have a brake output and our brake controller is functioning. And that'll finish up our look at and our installation of the Redarc Tow Pro Liberty brake controller on our 2014 Ford E-Series van.